Right, so I'm going to give a very quick overview of how you can look at a nutrition label and kind of understand all the pieces to help you with your macro tracking. So we'll just highlight a couple of things here. Let me share the first screen. We're going to use this one. Okay. All right. So here's just a basic example of a nutrition label. I believe this was something for like lasagna or something like that. So the first thing that you want to make sure you're looking at here is the serving size and how many servings per container. Now, an important note is that serving size is not the same as portion size. So in other words, it's not saying this is the portion that you should be having is 1 cup in this instance. A serving size on a nutrition label is just really supposed to give an indicator of what, on average, a typical person might eat in one sitting. Okay, so just realize that you can certainly adjust that to meet your needs, and you'll need to do that in some cases, obviously, depending on your macro goals. But that's one thing I want to point out. But this is basically saying that if you have 1 cup of this lasagna, then all of these data points are what will follow as far as the nutrition facts. And then in the whole container or whatever it was, there's 4 total servings. So there would be like 4 cups worth. So if you do have one serving, and in this case 1 cup, also notice that there's grams depending on the tracking app you're using. You can usually manipulate the serving to represent. It might be cups or grams, or sometimes it's ounces, but just realize those are the measurements you have there. Here you see the calories, right? So how many calories in 1 cup of this is 280. And then also it goes through obviously and shows the different nutrition facts. Just to focus on the macronutrients, we have the total fat here, we have the total carbohydrates here, and then we have the protein down at the bottom. Um, so again, say you only have half a cup of the lasagna, right? You'll need to manipulate those amounts. And again, your app should do that for you. And I'll show you an example in a second, but say you only had half a cup, right? That would take it to just 140 calories, 4.5 grams of fat, half of 34, you'd have 17 grams of carbs, and then about 7.5 grams of protein, right? So as far as the percentages here, just a quick and important note. First thing actually I'll call attention to is at the bottom, you'll see here, the percentages here are the daily value percentage. And on the bottom, it tells you that is in reference to a 2,000 calorie diet. And that's important to note because this is basically just giving you kind of a reference point for somebody who is shooting for 2,000 calories on a daily basis. It's saying that if they eat a cup of this, obviously they're getting 9 grams of fat, and that's going to represent about 12% of what their total intake of fat should be for the day. So again, if you're not eating 2,000 calories, say you're only eating 1,600, right? Then obviously that percentage for you would be a little bit higher because you're not having as many calories. If you're eating 2,500 calories, then that 12% of your daily fat value would probably be a little bit lower. But also, it depends on what your macro percentages are, right? So I'm not 100% sure what they have it set to kind of as the standard here. I have to go and calculate it. But that just kind of gives you a quick reference point, and you can see the little note here that typically if you see a percentage that's 5% or less, that means that that nutrient you're looking at, that macro, the sodium, the sugar, whatever it is it 5% or lower is considered like a low amount of that item. Whereas if you see 20% or more, then that's considered a high amount. So that just can kind of give you a little, quick glance and a quick reference. But again, that daily value is in reference to a 2,000 calorie diet. And again, possibly different macro splits than what you may be doing. Another quick thing here, total sugar versus added sugars. Most labels are going to now show you how many grams of added sugars, which basically means those that are not naturally occurring, right? So if you have, a piece of fruit or something like or I don't know, maybe it's frozen fruit in a bag that has the label. In most cases, you'll see like some kind of sugar in there since it's fruit. But what we would be looking at then too is if there's 0 grams of added sugar, it means that there was no, refined sugar or any other type of sweetener added to it. And then the last thing, real quick, to note on for the macros specifically, sidetracked on the sugar there a little bit. But for protein, you'll notice there's not a daily value percentage. And for a couple of reasons. Protein doesn't necessarily seem to be as much of a concern, or like a health concern, I guess, across the country necessarily as something like, fats and carbs might be. But also protein needs just vary a lot depending on your age, depending on your activity, lots of factors. And so typically the only time you may see a percentage there is if it's something that's claiming to be high protein, which typically is like 10 grams of protein or more per serving. You might see the percentage there. But again, those percentages, might not necessarily be relevant to you if you're not shooting for something close to 2,000 calories. And again, depending on what your macro splits are. But anyhow, real quick, I'm just going to show you a little quick, where's my thing here? I'm going to show you a little example of just logging and adjusting your portions or servings if you need to. So let me just pull up this little video real quick. Okay, so I'm using Cronometer, and so yours might look different if you're using something else, MyFitnessPal or whatever else you might be using. So this is just an example. But what I did is I went to go search for the food item I wanted to log. In this case, I was doing peanut butter because I'll often have that on my toast. And then, so you'll see the item, you'll see right here, the drop down is set for 2 tablespoons. However, if I don't have 2 tablespoons, which usually for breakfast, I maybe put 1 tablespoon on my toast, but that wasn't an option to put 2 tablespoons or 1 tablespoon on the drop down. What I did is I entered 0.5 up there, and it adjusted all those calories. So I'm gonna actually back up a little bit on that. Hold on 1 second. So, okay, so see, there was no option here to do 1 tablespoon. So, yeah, what I did is I went up here and I inserted, instead of 1 for the serving, I made it half. So I did 0.5. Okay, so a little math on my part, but then you can see to adjust the calories and the macros accordingly. Okay. You could do a 0.25, a fourth, or if you did, 4 tablespoons, you could double that. But yeah, and then you could also do grams. Like in that case, it showed, I think it's a 32 grams. So if it was 32 grams for 1 serving and I needed to manipulate it to half of that, I could, if it's in terms of grams, I could just type in 16 grams. So there's ways to kind of manipulate and change your servings, and just realize that you may need to do that sometimes, and also to kind of cross-check like wherever it's showing on your screen. Like after you've manipulated it, always do like a double check to make sure it looks right. Right. So if it's, something that has 200 calories and you only had half, just double check to make sure that when you change that, the amount for the servings, it reflects 100 calories if that's what it should be. So anyhow, guys, this is a topic we could definitely spend a lot more time on, but hopefully that gives you a little quick kind of beginner's overview at the nutrition labels.